Hi, everybody, and welcome to Lovefraud Live. Today, I'm going to be talking about something a little bit different. Hollywood and the news media keep telling us that sociopaths are serial killers, and I keep telling you that that's not necessarily true. But sometimes it is true. Sociopaths are not always vicious murderers, but sometimes they are. I'm appearing in 2 upcoming episodes of Deadly Women, which is the hit crime series on Investigation Discovery. I will talk about 2 cases in which women committed unbelievably brutal murders, right near where I live. I'm Donna Andersen, author of Lovefraud.com, and tonight I'm going to explain the cases of Loretta Burroughs, who murdered her husband, chopped him up, and kept his body parts in plastic containers for 7 years. I will also talk about the case of Heather Barbera, who bludgeoned her mother and grandmother to death. This is a live streaming show, and I'll answer your questions at the end of my short presentation. So please send them to me as we go along, and you can also use our super chat function to ask your questions. So in my first appearance on Deadly Women, the show is about Loretta Burroughs. It will air on Thursday, June 17th, 2021 at 9 p.m. on the Investigation Discovery Network. It will also be available that day on the Discovery Plus streaming service. The Loretta Burroughs story is absolutely appalling. Here are the highlights. Loretta was a grandmother in her late 50s living in Mays Landing, New Jersey with her husband, Daniel Burroughs. In 2007, Danny disappeared, and Loretta told everyone that he left in a yellow Hummer to go to Florida with a younger woman. 7 years later, Danny's badly decomposed body was found in 2 large plastic tote containers in Loretta's home. She was charged with murder. I covered the trial for the Daily Mail, and during the trial it came out that Loretta had carefully planned her husband's execution. While he was incapacitated, after shoulder surgery, she stabbed him to death, dismembered his body, packed it into plastic containers, and dragged them around with her as she moved twice. She also got a power of attorney and filed for divorce so she could collect all of her husband's assets. The second show, about Heather Barbera, will air on Thursday, July 8th, 2021 at 9 p.m. on ID. This show will start streaming also on Discovery Plus on July 1st. Heather was a 42-year-old woman with a drug problem. When her second marriage fell apart in 2018, she had no place to live. Heather's mother, Michelle Gordon, and grandmother, Elaine Rosen, shared a condo on the boardwalk in Ventnor, New Jersey, which is just outside of Atlantic City. They took Heather in. A few months later, on July 8th, 2018, Richard Rosen went to the condo and discovered the bodies of his sister and his mother. They'd been beaten to death. Richard immediately suspected Heather. She was picked up in New York City a few days later and charged with the murders. So, those are the case summaries. I'm a journalist and an expert on sociopaths, so the producers of Deadly Women contacted me to appear on the programs. Now, I haven't seen the shows yet, so I don't know which of my comments they're going to use. But I kind of doubt that they'll include an analysis of whether or not the women had personality disorders. So tonight I'll give you my thoughts on that topic. In my opinion, Loretta Burroughs is clearly a psychopath. Heather Barbera, I'm not so sure. So why do I say that? Let's talk about Loretta. First of all, Loretta had a criminal record. Donna Burroughs actually married Loretta after she got out of prison. She served time for embezzlement. While she was being investigated for stealing $480,000 from a former employer in Pennsylvania, she also stole $36,500 from a current employer in New Jersey. She was convicted of that crime. Secondly, the murder of Donna Burroughs was premeditated and cold-blooded. Loretta waited until her husband's arm was in a sling after rotator cuff surgery and possibly pumped him with too many meds. She killed him and dismembered his body. She cut off his head and put it in one of her handbags. It took her hours, and when she was done, she met up with her daughter and grandchildren and went on a short vacation. So let that sink in. She butchered her husband, literally, and then went to Sesame Place, where she floated down the lazy river with her grandkids. Who has the capacity to do that? Only a psychopath. Loretta then made up a story that Danny had abandoned her. She sold their home, all of his possessions, and took legal action to get her hands on all the money. In the end, she killed her husband for a profit of about $100,000. When she was arrested, Loretta pleaded innocent, insisting that Danny had run off with that other woman. Now let's talk about the Heather Barbera case, which is much more nuanced. Heather definitely had problems. She was a drug addict. Her first marriage fell apart, and she lost custody of her children. Then, her second marriage disintegrated, and she was down and out with no place to live. It was interesting to read the media coverage, especially an article about Heather's two uncles, her mother's brothers, and to see what they had to say. Both men agreed that the family was totally dysfunctional, but they interpreted the situation differently. Richard Rosen, the one who found the bodies, thought that Heather was strung out on drugs. He warned his sister and his mother not to take her in, and after the murders, wanted Heather to stay in jail for the rest of her life. Now, his brother, Louis Rosen, however, was almost understanding of Heather's situation. He described Heather as being sweet as sugar and said his sister, Michelle Gordon, could push buttons that would trigger anyone's temper to the point of murder. Michelle Gordon's son had recently died of a heroin overdose just a few months before these murders, and Michelle blamed it on Heather. So this is what Heather was dealing with. She also had a history of violence. She assaulted her husband, who got a restraining order against her. She assaulted her children's nanny, causing serious injuries. In that case, she was sentenced to 3 years of probation. So, why did she do it? Well, I don't know for sure, but it's possible that Heather's violence was due to her addiction. She was addicted to heroin. Research shows that there is a strong correlation between drug and alcohol use and acts of violence, especially domestic violence. 75% of people who seek treatment for drug addiction report having engaged in violence, including mugging, physical assault, and using a weapon to attack another person. Drugs and alcohol weaken self-control. So there was no suggestion that Heather's crimes were premeditated. Now, I'm not excusing her, but maybe it's a situation where everything just spun out of control. In the end, Loretta Burroughs claimed that she didn't do anything, and Heather Barbera pleaded guilty to her crimes and apologized with remorse. We all know that psychopaths never take the blame for anything. So I'd say that accepting responsibility for what happened is a pretty good clue about which one of these women may be a psychopath. So that's the presentation for tonight, and next I'll answer your questions. We've implemented Super Chat on this YouTube show, which provides you with the opportunity to contribute to Lovefraud's work, and we really appreciate it if you're able to do so. If you'd like to support us, all you have to do is click the $ in the chat window and slide the button to the amount that you'd like to donate. Here's a tip. If you type your question in the Super Chat, it helps me to see them. If you've been watching the show for a while, you may have noticed that sometimes I can't quite catch everybody's questions, so Super Chat solves that problem. Okay, so let's take a look and see what we have. Maroka Walker asks, what part are you playing in the show? These are unscripted television shows, and all the shows on Investigation Discovery are like that. So essentially, they put the story together by interviewing people. So I'm not actually playing a part, I'm just telling what I know about what happened in both of these situations, and then expressing a few opinions on some of the things that went on. For example, I'm pretty sure that I said that Loretta Burroughs was probably a sociopath or a psychopath. And I do remember commenting on the Heather Barbera case, in which I brought up that I wasn't sure that she was like a totally evil person. And I talked about the fact that drug addictions can turn people to violence. So anyway, I was interviewed for a couple of hours for each of the shows, but I have no idea what they're actually going to use for my interviews, because they also interview other people, including some of the relatives and perhaps some prosecutors or law enforcement people, and then they just put it all together depending on whose comments they like and how they want to tell the story. So essentially, I'm appearing as Donna Andersen, Lovefraud author, and talking about what I know as far as what happened with these two cases. Okay, so Lou is asking again what the show is called. The show is called Deadly Women. It's a show that's been running for quite a long time. This is actually the 14th season, so there's like over 100 episodes. And what they do in the show is that each episode, I think, is an hour long, but they tell 3 stories. So they tell the stories pretty quickly. In the Loretta Burroughs episode, for example, there's 2 other women being profiled. Can't quite remember their names, but both of them killed their lovers. One woman killed her boyfriend, and he actually recorded the entire murder on his cell phone. So that's one of the cases. And then the other one is about a woman who essentially stalked and then shot her ex-lover after he dumped her. They called it like a fatal attraction type of killing. So the show is called Deadly Women, and they'll first air the dates that I said this Thursday, and if you're watching it currently, that's June 17th, 9 o'clock Eastern time for the first one, and then July 8th for the second one. But if you're watching this video at some point afterwards, you'll be able to probably see this wherever Investigation Discovery shows run. They also have the Discovery Plus channel, so you can probably see it there as well. Okay, so Suzanne asks, psychopaths can apologize, but they're not sincere, correct? Yes, that's absolutely true. Psychopaths do not have the capacity for remorse. That's actually one of the traits of the disorder, one of the diagnostic criteria. But they do, when they think it suits their purpose, apologize, say that they're sorry for something. Usually, or I would say almost always, when a psychopath does that, essentially what they're trying to do is keep you on the hook, keep you buttered up, so that you will continue to do whatever it is that you're doing with him, provide whatever it is that you're providing, that you'll continue to be supplied. Of course, this is for male and female psychopaths, and obviously I'm talking about female psychopaths with this show. So, yeah, but you cannot trust an apology by a psychopath. In the episode that I talked about, Heather Barbera did seem to express genuine remorse, and apparently once she was clean, obviously once she was in jail, she didn't have access to drugs anymore, so she sobered up, and apparently she was pretty devastated by her own actions. She also had a couple of people who were character witnesses for her and said that, this wasn't the person that they knew. So perhaps her apology was authentic, but Loretta Burroughs never apologized for a thing. Okay. So Sammy says she watches the show often, and I'll definitely watch yours. Okay, well, that's great. Like I said, I'm not sure how much I'll be featured. Probably maybe 2 or 3 little quotes. That's probably about all that there will be from me. But I might be pleasantly surprised. You never know. Oh, so Sammy points out they also interview psychologists. Yes, that they definitely do that sometimes. So I kind of fit into that expert type category. So what I did was I told what I knew about the story, and then some comments on what I thought was going on behind the scenes. So Sammy asks, where is the show filmed? Well, this type of show, what they do is they send a crew around to wherever the people are that they're interviewing. Now, in this particular case, both of these murders took place right around here. I live in the Atlantic City, New Jersey area, and so they were both right in the area. So obviously then most of the people who would be involved in the case are around here. So they come to this area, they interview a prosecutor, they may interview another reporter, they interview family members. So typically what these shows do is that they go to the location of wherever the people are whose story that they are telling. They also drive around and get what they call B-roll. And what B-roll is like scenery. They probably drove by the house that Loretta Burroughs used to live in. And maybe a few other places around here. Maybe they went to Sesame Place. I don't know. I guess we'll see when we see the show. So that's typically what they do in these cases. So Jay's Cat World says, I love Deadly Women. Excited to see these episodes. Those are some bad ladies. Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I did an interview once, 6 or 7 years ago, maybe more, up in New York. It was actually on a comedy show. And I was talking about the fact that my story had been on Investigation Discovery. I don't know if you folks have seen that or not, but I appeared in a show called Who the Bleep Did I Marry? Which came out in 2010, And so they actually told my story in that show, and you could see it now. It's still running like on Amazon Prime or maybe a few other places. But anyhow, I was talking about investigation discovery, and one of the women who was part of the show said that whole network is about sociopaths, and it's true. If you ever watch the shows on investigation discovery, just about every one of those perpetrators is a sociopath or a psychopath. And every once in a while, somebody will say it, perhaps, one of the cops or one of the prosecutors or one of the psychologists. But if you want to see how they behave, you can definitely watch that show or any of the shows on that network. What's interesting is they often talk about the lead up to how the murder, because there's always a dead body. These shows almost always have a dead body. So they talk about how the perpetrator was like controlling or isolating the person, and this is all what goes on in real life. Of course, most of us who get involved with sociopaths are still alive, although I have heard of people who have been murdered, like this. But when they talk about the circumstances and talk about the behavior of these individuals, they're pretty much on the money. They're describing the love bombing and the deception and the manipulation and all the different things that we've kind of experienced in our own ways. So I think from that point of view, the shows are pretty instructive about how sociopaths behave. It's just that some of them keep going all the way to murder, whereas most sociopaths don't. I mean, most sociopaths do not commit murder. So you may wonder, how come there's so many of these shows on TV? Well, let's remember what the numbers are. I was talking about that last week. There could be somewhere between 30 and 40 million sociopaths in the United States. Obviously, all these people aren't committing murder, but, there's that percentage that are doing it, and so they end up on investigation discovery. Okay, so JCat World says, how did you get accustomed to those two evil women? I know they both live in Ventnor, New Jersey. Well, I never met them. I did see Loretta Burroughs because I was at the trial and covered that. But yeah, they were in Ventnor, New Jersey, which is, not far from where I am. Interestingly enough, I've also seen other shows on Investigation Discovery or the Oxygen Network. They do the same thing for more murders that were in this area. So they can be anywhere. They can just be anywhere. I don't think this area is any more dangerous than a lot of other places, especially some big cities these days. I can think of some cities that I wouldn't want to be in right now. But anyway, it can happen anywhere. Sociopaths are in all walks of life, all areas, all races, all religions, men and women, old and young. They can be anywhere. So, unfortunately, their behavior can be anywhere. Okay, well, looks like that's the end of the questions for tonight. We'll see how these shows go. Maybe we'll talk about it some more, depending on how they portray things. And I thank you for joining us here on Lovefraud Live. And hopefully we'll see you next week. Okay, thanks a lot, everybody. Bye-bye.